All right, welcome back, Chelsea fans, to another episode of the London is Blue podcast. I, of course, am your host, Nick, joined for a Matt Law special by one Matt Law. Matt, how are we doing?
Yeah, if you'd have got me on just after the Villa game, I'd have been a bit more chipper than a couple of days after the Crystal Palace Villa game. So there you go. But that's the way this season is, isn't it, for all of us? You take your wins and you get hit by your defeats as well.
Yeah, the old midweek after the weekend matches have been a little more unpredictable. It feels like this year,
Yeah,
and
but good for Chelsea. Good for Chelsea this week.
well, yeah. I mean, if you don't beat Southampton this year, I, I don't know. It feels like that's like a gimme for most teams, but yeah, of course, you guys know what we're doing here. We're going to talk through Chelsea's win over Southampton, kind of the key indicators that kind of came out of that match, and what could be next, some player ratings, the next run of fixtures, and then a little bit on the discontent and the fact that Todd Bowley in a few hours is going to give some quotes for the first time in a long time. So we'll have to wait on those for a little bit, but. Matt, let's kind of start with the Southampton match. We were talking a little bit before we started recording about Chelsea go to Villa Park up early, looking pretty good, pretty much collapse in the second half. Villa play a much better second half. They lose, and the sentiment that had been growing for a while, which is that this team simply cannot play two halves of football in succession, gets even more amped up. They have a pretty easy match. Just again, let's couch this against Southampton, but look a little bit better, maybe play a little bit more comprehensive, two halves of football here. What did you take away from the response after the Villa game?
Yeah, look, as you rightly say, it was the perfect match for them. I was even I was at the Villa game. I'll put it out there. I wasn't actually at the Southampton game. I've been covering a court case. I had to be at somewhere else, but I have watched highlights back. But I was at the Villa game, and I remember sat at the Villa game towards the end of the game when it looked like it might be a draw, thinking, do you know what? With Southampton and Leicester coming, a draw's not a bad result here, because the Southampton game is just a perfect match for Chelsea at where they currently are and the confidence they need to take. So we'll couch it with that, and it proved to be the case. What I think has been encouraging the last two games, and I think we might speak about him in a bit more detail, is Pedro Neto. He's looked, goal and an assist. I'm right. What, just one assist, isn't it? Well, one assist against Villa and the goal. Two assists. Sorry, two assists and goal. I mean, my complaint about Neto up until very recently, where his actual input and output in terms of numbers, goals and assists, wasn't good enough for his talent. And it feels like he's stepped up a little bit. Actually, he feels to have taken it by the balls a little bit and decided, there's no strikers. I'm going to prove I can do a bit of this, and I've liked his attitude a lot. His very, very high work rate and energy in both games. And I feel the tempo waned against Villa, but certainly at the start of the game and also against Southampton, I feel like he helped set a tempo, getting about the opposition, getting in fast, being extremely positive, extremely front-footed. I've really liked that. I think that's encouraging. And I do look. I know again an individual we might talk about in more detail. Enzo Fernandez has stepped up a little bit, and I thought against Villa that was partly because of Enzo Maresca's tactical tweak helped Fernandez, certainly in the first half, gave him a bit more freedom, got him more into more forward areas. But then obviously against Southampton, he was playing in more of that sort of two role with Caicedo. But I suppose partly because Southampton is so bad, he still ends up with a lot of space. But he was doing a lot of good things, a lot of good numbers that I know you want to come on to. So I would say those are the two main takeaways. But just as well, look, they had to not only win, but they had to win with something to give everybody a little bit of optimism. So if they'd have just won 1-0, 2-1, even if they'd have won like 3-1 but gone 1-0 behind, there'd have still been a lot of questions, and I still think a lot of negativity. I think winning in the manner they did, and I know they didn't necessarily start the game amazingly, but I think as soon as they got ahead, that was pretty much good to go. But I think winning in the manner they did, not conceding, scoring 4 goals, some good individual performances, I do think that's important for them to lift the mood around the place, give them a little bit of momentum, not tons of momentum, but a little bit of momentum ahead. What looks like a nice little run of games heading into the international break. And look, it's just what they needed. I mean, quite frankly, if they hadn't won or they hadn't have won with any sort of distinction, we'd be sat here talking about a disaster. So they had to avoid the disaster as much as anything.
Yeah, I mean, after the Villa game, Maresca's quotes were that, he thought that we played well and it was a better performance coming off of, a pretty resounding defeat at Brighton and, all that sort of stuff. I mean, I guess one thing, I mean, you're in the stadium, you're seeing this team, start fast and finish very slow, right? And that's not just
Yeah,
been the Villa game this season.
yeah,
It's been a rarity that they've finished as strong as they've started or started as strong as they finished. It's been a very Jekyll and Hyde team in that regard. Villa had just played 3 days earlier against Liverpool, which is an incredibly tough game, physical game, got a result, and yet looked more fit. Are,
yeah.
are you seeing the same things that we're seeing?
I was surprised by that because I was sat at the game, maybe thinking, when this hits the hour mark, are we going to see Villa hit the wall, and are we going to see some of the advantage that Chelsea should have from the schedule play into their hands? Now, what we actually saw, obviously, was that Villa's bench was a whole lot stronger, and also that it was used. And I feel a bit silly saying this now because Unai Emery's just had an absolute nightmare against Crystal Palace and been done over by Oliver Glasner. But forgetting that, Unai did a number on Enzo in that Chelsea game with the half-time switch by stretching the play out with Rashford. That that pushed back Gusto, which in turn seemed to isolate Reece a little bit in midfield. And all of a sudden, everything that was good about the first half was taken away from Chelsea. And Enzo didn't react. He just didn't react. So I thought Unai did a job on him in that second half, both with the bench and with his tactics. And Enzo didn't really react with any tactical change or with any significant bench changes. I know he had a very inexperienced bench, but why not use it? So that was my takeaway from the energy point of view. Although I was, even with the lack of sort of options off the bench, I was still surprised that, and with Villa bringing players on, I was surprised that Villa finished the game so much stronger than Chelsea, given that Chelsea should, in theory, be fresher. But then let's counter that by the fact that, I mean, many things caught up with Villa against Palace in the week, but one of them was the last 2 games, and they fell to pieces and completely ran out of legs. And albeit again in an easier match, Chelsea did manage to keep it going. So I don't know how much you can draw from it. I don't quite know. If I'm honest, I don't quite know what to draw from it other than to observe the fact it happened.
It's to me, it's kind of a, if plan A works for Chelsea, cool, good. What is plan B?
Well, this is the
I
question that's been around Maresca ever since Leicester days, and we haven't seen it yet, really. And
Right.
he didn't react against Villa. He just didn't. But he is. Chelsea fans won't like this because they'll feel, and I can understand why, that they shouldn't have a manager who's in this position. But it's the first top flight job he's ever had. He's learning on the job, and frankly, that's not his fault.
Sure. Yeah, but you would think, especially on the run, right, which is now 4 out of 12, not been going that well, kind of slipped in the table. Like, surely I need to try something
Mm,
different. Like, things are not going to just magically turn around unless we force some change here. I guess that is the question, because I would agree that, like, the bench in both of these games has not been full strength. Of course,
mm.
there are a ton of players missing. and will probably be missing for some time. But we're entering this stage where legs are going to become an issue. Regardless of the fact that Chelsea have these magical breaks in the middle of the kind of late winter, early spring, where we'll have 9 days before we play next, and that's going to be helpful for sure. But when Chelsea get into the kind of late April, May time, like there's going to be quite a jam of fixtures. He's going to have to figure out something with the legs, because if they look this leggy, on essentially a week's rest against Villa, yikes, man! I don't know.
I mean, obviously, he thinks most of the big players are going to be back quite soon after the international break. So I suppose with a squad, he will feel he can do more with that. Although I question whether we've seen an awful lot of evidence of it up to now, even when he had more players available to him. But no, you're right. You're right. I mean, the legs. Some clubs are finding. Look, obviously, the biggest one up until now has been Tottenham with the legs and the injuries. Some clubs seem to be kind of bang in the middle of it now, including my club Villa. And I think other clubs have it coming to them down the line, as you say, probably more like April, May. And Chelsea might be one of those, because Chelsea, you would imagine, are going to go all the way in the Conference League. So it's not like they're going to suddenly drop out of that and not have the midweek fixtures. And it's going to, I would assume, and they've had the injuries, but I would assume they're going to have the schedule issues hit them, because as well, even though the Conference League, everyone will assume they'll get to the final at a canter. It's clear from the way the squad is now for the Conference League, he's not going to be able to do the A and B team anymore. And quite frankly, I don't think he would. It would probably be a bit disrespectful to the competition, and you risk a stupid banana skin somewhere, which would be ridiculous. So it will be a stronger team as well in the Conference League now. It'll be a different kind of team and a different juggling act for the squad than what it was in the early weeks, when it was literally just A and B team, which kind of, as we discussed before, to one extent worked out well for them, and to a second extent led to some unhappy people come January.
You did mention Neto and Enzo, and I do want to talk about them because I feel like, of the latest developments, they are probably the two most positive on this side. Given that Neto is kind of doing some of the Nico Jackson stuff, making the runs, the diagonals, trying his best, even though he's not nearly as big as Nico is, doing some of the hold up play, making some decent passes out of pressure, coming back and receiving the ball. Like, there's some pretty noticeable things that are happening there that are similar to what kind of the pressure release valve that Nico is at times. Definitely interested in your thoughts on, like, is this sustainable for at least the next, let's call it 3 or 4 weeks, before maybe some of these players start to come back into the fold?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't see why it's not. I don't think it'd be sustainable all the way up until the end of the season. I don't see someone being able to play with quite that much energy and getting about the pitch quite as much as he has until the end. He is a player, obviously, who traditionally at Wolves had a lot of injury issues. So you're always slightly fearful, although that, correct me if I'm wrong, that hasn't really caught up with him yet at Chelsea. But certainly in past seasons, he's always had one significant, if not two significant, hamstring injuries. So I suppose they will look very carefully at that because of his history. But no, I don't see why not for the next few weeks, and also because Leicester and Copenhagen. Let's without being too disrespectful, not top opposition. So you'd imagine a lot of his work can be done with the ball rather than chasing after the ball, because they should be games where Chelsea dominate the ball, and therefore it's a lot different running when your team or yourself have got the ball than when the opposition have got the ball and you're having to chase around everyone like that. And also it allows you a few more rests within games. But as I said before, I've just been really impressed with his attitude. I've just felt like we've been crying out for a couple of players to really decide we're going to grab the bull by the horns. We're going to try and sort this out. We're going to try and take some responsibility away from Cole here and take some responsibility that's been left from the injured players. And Neto's attitude and everything in these last two games just suggests that he's really thought that way. And I also feel that maybe he's enjoyed the fact that possibly he's a bit more of a main man, because obviously against Villa, he was kind of given this central role where he had license to roam out to the right, but
Yep.
it was almost like he was made the main man in attack against Villa, and he seemed to absolutely relish that. And then that pushed on to the Southampton game, where he seemed to have a lot more confidence on the back of it. And maybe a new player, he was getting switched a lot from left to right. I know he doesn't love playing on the left. It was more out of necessity. Maybe all of a sudden now, once it takes a few players to be out and the manager to have to put a little bit more faith in him and putting him into positions where he actually prefers being, maybe that's helped him a lot as well. Maybe just that extra bit of responsibility. But it's encouraging. It's more like the Neto I expected to see when they signed him. I mean, I know his numbers at Wolves weren't. He's a strange player because he looks incredibly dangerous on the eye, and then when you delve into his numbers don't quite back that up. But I really thought, coming into a team a lot better than Wolves, who wouldn't be facing relegation and would have a lot more of the ball and would surely create a lot more chances and openings, that the numbers would quickly improve for him. And until now, they haven't. But this last two matches are way more than Neto I expected to see at Chelsea, and makes you think, it can be an excellent signing for them. He's really dangerous.
Another player that's putting together a pretty decent overall season this year after a slow start is Enzo. We had the stat box that, against Southampton, he was the first Chelsea player to score to create 3+ big chances and record 7+ key passes in a single Premier League match over the last 10 seasons. So that was, it's not just a stat in isolation. It feels, like a pretty decent, creation sort of stat. He has, played in different roles this year. Obviously, he played in a much more forward role against Villa than he did against Southampton, just due to, Reece James in and out of the team. Is this, a person, we'll talk about Cole's struggles here in a second. Is this a player that you think can help to fill some of the gap that maybe Cole is leaving in terms of creation and scoring and that sort of thing? Or do you want to see him a little further back pulling the strings? I mean, it's a difficult one for me to kind of
I like him
process.
further forward. I don't like him further back. I never have
Okay.
really liked him further back. I like him further forward. I feel it's where my complaint with Enzo has always been, I've said it on this show so many times, he's clearly a wonderful footballer. I've never quite, up until kind of this season, grasped quite what he is, quite what I'm meant to be expecting from him. This season, when he's played more forward, I've seen it more, and I much prefer him more forward. I see him as an assister. I see him as someone who can arrive in the box and score goals. I see him as someone who can have a lot of touches in the opposition penalty area. There was a good stat against Villa as well, actually, in that I think in the first half he had 3 efforts on goal, which was as many as he'd had in an entire match the rest of the season. And that was just in the first half, which showed in the first half against Villa that tactical tweak had really worked. And Enzo, actually, when Neto was pulling to the right, Enzo was almost advancing into his kind of false 9 position. He was so high up. But him and Neto were causing Villa all kinds of problems in that first half. And there was promising sort of partnership between the two of them, and also promising from the way Enzo played. Now, I thought, a bit like the team, Enzo sort of dropped off quite a lot in the second half against Villa. But you're right. I mean, those numbers against, I wasn't actually aware of them particularly. Those numbers against Southampton are very encouraging, albeit against woeful opposition who he has an awful lot of time and space against. But that shouldn't take away from the fact he's done it. And I prefer him further forward. I thought that when, if you have Lavia and Caicedo, I think Enzo just a little bit ahead of them is a really nice midfield. Obviously, Lavia's fitness issues cause a problem for that. And I think that is probably something Maresca deserves a bit of credit for, because I think he's the first manager at Chelsea to really unlock anything out of Enzo. We've seen it in bits and bobs, because he's clearly such a talented player. He's going to do good things in matches. He's going to get good assists. He's going to do something good. And we've seen other matches where he's scored and stuff. But I think Maresca does deserve a little bit of credit in that when he's had him in that position, that he seems to fancy him a bit further forward. It has unlocked a bit in him. And his performances have been better there. But I still want to see. I want to see it when they play Arsenal at home. I want to see it when they play Tottenham at home. I want to see it then. Great, we've seen it against Southampton at home. Encouraging. We've seen it for one half against Aston Villa. Encouraging. Let's see it for a prolonged spell against an Arsenal or Tottenham, something like that.
Well, I think connected to this is the Reece James in midfield thing, right? You mentioned Lavia. We'll talk about the injuries again here in a second. It doesn't feel like he's that close, maybe after the international break, but we'll see. Reece in midfield to me was a very, very interesting tweak against Villa. Did not play against Southampton. I think they're still kind of treating him and his injury appropriately, right? Not trying to wear him down too quickly. 41 of 42 accurate passes against Villa, 4 of 4 long balls completed, 1 of 2 dribble attempts. Didn't have a shot on target, but was rarely in a position to. Didn't do that great on ground duels. He was only 3 of 7, but I think looked pretty decent in that role. I think got a little tired toward the end of the game.
I think until, like I said before, I think until Unai switched it for Villa at half time, I think he did really well. I thought first half he was helping to sort of run the midfield with Chelsea, and I thought with Gusto sort of advancing and pushing in a little bit and helping him out and providing numbers, I thought it really helped him and he did well. Once he got isolated in the second half, when Villa stretched the play and Gusto couldn't help out as much or get close to him, I thought then maybe we saw some of the sort of physical, not issues, but just, we know he can't get around quite like he might have done if he hadn't have had all the injuries. We know he's probably not fully match fit yet because of all the injuries. I mean, the fact he didn't play against Southampton tells us he's not fully match fit yet. So I thought we saw both sides to the Reece experiment. I thought we saw that it can work really well. I think until he gets to a certain physical level, he will need help in there. And the issue being is if you have a manager who manages to stop him having help in there or a team who stops him having help in there, I think it gets tough for him. I thought in the second half he found it tough. I thought all of Chelsea's midfield found it tough. They got swamped a little bit. But yeah, I think probably, like I say, we saw the good and also what still kind of needs a bit of time with Reece. But I would heavily look. I know they lost the game, and I know second half wasn't good, but I would still heavily credit Maresca for the first half for the tweak because I thought the initial tactics worked. It's just he didn't respond once Villa changed. The initial tactics were good. Playing Reece there and getting Fernandes further up the pitch was good, and they could have gone in 2 goals up or whatever. It's the fact he then didn't react. But Reece as an option there I think it will end up getting looked at again at some stage. I don't think that will end up being the only time we see that happen.
Yeah, it feels like that's going to be an A lineup, tough game sort of situation. I think that you're going to see that probably against Arsenal. Probably as you look at the Tottenham match after the international break, I think you're going to start to
unless
probably see that.
Lavia's fit for that Tottenham match. If Lavia's fit, then I don't really see why it wouldn't just be Lavia in there. But while Lavia's out, or if Lavia has to come back and then be in or out, then I think Reece is an option. And it's interesting actually because I'm sure I referenced it on this show. I'm sure I'm not dreaming about the fact that I referenced it on the show. But when we were talking so much in January about why haven't they signed a midfielder, I'm sure I referenced the fact that they thought that because Reece is coming back, he will offer them an option. And that was obviously what they were talking about. I was surprised to see it. But like I say, in the first half, it worked really well.
What hasn't been working well recently is Cole Palmer's really, I think for the first time in a Chelsea shirt, not been Cole Palmer. Created a ton of chances in the Premier League this season, 69, has now gone 14 Premier League matches without an assist. He has more expected assists than Mo Salah this season. Mo Salah notably has 17, Cole has 6.
What's an expected assist? Explain this one to me. How does an
basically
expected assist work?
your passing, your final pass is so good that it should be scored.
Oh, okay.
They
All
should
right.
have eight. Cole should have 8.82 expected assists. Mo Salah on 8.63 roughly.
But does
But
that
the difference
mean
is finishing.
Salah? But then that surely means that more of Salah's passes have been finished into goals.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
17 compared to 6,
Okay.
right? This
Cool.
is
Yeah. Got
where
you.
we are. Uh, what do you think's going on with him? He looked incredibly frustrated against Southampton. I think he's looked kind of like he's trying something that's not coming off, maybe trying a little bit too hard at
Trying too
moments.
hard. That's exactly what I was going to say. Trying too
I
hard.
mean,
I think he is
the
now trying too hard. I think the narrative around him has got to him a little bit. I don't know this obviously, but I suspect he looks like someone at the moment who's maybe reading things online about himself or watching pundits say things about him, which I never really got the impression he was that kind of guy before. And I might be wrong because there's no way I can know that. It's just observing him from the outside because it just looks as though everything's got a little bit on top of him recently. He's trying too hard. He's frustrated. He's
yeah,
angry at himself. He's angry at teammates. He's a little bit angry at the world at times. Um, he looks a little bit sort of confused by it all as well. There's been a couple of times where he's missed, where he's just looked a little bit confused, as we all are when you see him go through and
yeah,
doesn't end up scoring. Um, Against Villa, I was a bit critical of him. He reminded me a bit of Bruno Fernandes against Villa, how he gets with Man United when he just starts like getting so frustrated. He goes mad at his teammates and gets so worked up he almost kind of gives up. There was after he missed that chance. I mean, where the press box is at Villa, it's just as you're looking at the pitch, it's just left of centre towards the goal where Cole had his big chance where he went through on Emi Martinez. So I had a really good view of that. And I mean, I couldn't believe he didn't score. But then when he didn't score, he just sat on the floor and Villa raced at the other end of the pitch. And Cole just sat on the floor watching. And Villa had quite a good chance to score. Like they really, it was a proper counter attack. And Rashford, I think, raced off with it. And I thought they were going to score. And Cole was just sat on the floor watching it. I thought, you can't do that. You can't just sit on the floor. Like, however frustrating and annoying this is. And I
yeah,
don't think I'm not like questioning his attitude because you can see he almost wants to do it too much. So it's not like a bad attitude from that perspective. But I just thought, you can't do that. You've got to get up. You've got to do something. You can't just sit on the floor because that looks like you're saying, oh, well, I've missed it. It's up to you all guys. You can play with 10 men for a bit. I didn't like that. He flung his arm at Nkunku at one point when he played, I've got to say, not a particularly good pass in his direction, and Nkunku got nowhere near it. And he flung his arm. Now, I think he was flinging his arm both at himself, at almost just a reaction
yeah.
to his own not very good pass, but also it felt like frustration coming out towards Nkunku, who up until the Southampton game hadn't been doing very well. Um, and I get that, but that had a bit of Bruno Fernandes to it to me which I don't really like. But I also get it because he's
Well,
trying so
it's
hard.
not
He's so
what you want.
frustrated. He's carried the team so much. It'll be really interesting because I mean I thought he'd score against Southampton and he should have scored. It will be really, really interesting because he will score soon. I would, quite happily put a fiver on him to score against Leicester or Copenhagen. Whether he plays against Copenhagen, not totally sure, but certainly play against Leicester. Um, It'd be really interesting whether literally all it'll take is one goal for it to click all back into place. That would be my hunch looking at him. That it's just literally going to be one goal and then everything's hunky dory again with him.
Uh, we can hope. We can hope.
I don't. I mean, I've seen some online. I don't know how you feel about this, Nick. You might have more of a view than me because being a supporter. But I've seen a bit of online criticism of Maresca over Palmer and trying to suggest that he's kind of negated the genius slightly. I struggle to kind of see what he's done wrong with Palmer. Do you have a view on that?
No, I don't. I think if those assists, those expected assists get converted into goals, like the numbers look even better than they did last year.
Yeah,
And you're probably looking at a guy that is up for Premier League Player of the Season. And I think the recent slide plus Chelsea's just overall form have meant that he's not going to necessarily be up for those accolades. Mo Salah is obviously going to run away with that this year, pretty concretely. But this is he's not having a good time right now. Like you can genuinely tell that. And there was a point. I think about this time last year where Chelsea were just about to start playing well again, that you can look back and no one was really having a good time. I think we'll talk about the schedule here in a sec, but like go on a winning run, even if you're not involved in the goals and assists, and can just start to see it again a little bit, see it into the back of the net. Like,
yeah.
Against Villa, a confident Cole
Oh,
Palmer chips Martinez, and it's,
100. Yeah, the minute, because Martinez slipped, didn't he? So the minute
yeah,
Martinez starts slipping, then Cole slipped too. But the other
yeah.
thing I wanted to say on Cole, actually, which I do think will be good for him, even if he comes steaming back before the international break and scores in the next game and looks bang back at it, I think the international break will come at a good time for Cole. I've seen this because I cover England a lot, and I've seen this with a fair few players who just look like they need a little bit of change of atmosphere, change of scenery. I think him going away with England, it'll be Tuchel's first camp. They've got two very easy games, England, that they'll win. I'm sure he'll play minutes. He'll be around different players. He'll be around, quite frankly, players if he does create a chance are probably more likely to put it away. Obviously, Harry Kane being the main one. And I think that change of scenery and just change of atmosphere will come, even if he gets back on a little good run before then, will come at a really good time for him. I've seen it with other players. I've seen it with Ollie Watkins at Villa. If he's going through a slump, he'll sometimes go away with Villa and come back and look a different player. And I've seen it with other players too. And I looked at it the other day and just thought, you know what, that international break is just being away, even not the break itself, because I think if he stayed around Chelsea, he carries on in that bubble. Just getting out the Chelsea bubble for 2 weeks with England will actually come at a really good time for him, I think, just looking at him from the outside.
Let's talk about player ratings really quick, because we did this I think right before Chelsea's poor run of play started, where we kind of analyzed the squad. I pulled in from SofaScore just the average SofaScore rating for the Premier League with at least 50% of the matches played. So it's a shorter list this time, not the entire
Okay.
grouping. Um, Cole, obviously, number one at 7.73. Do you feel like that is too low, too high, or just about right out of 10?
Too low. We can't just do recency bias for the season. Too low. He's in the eights for me.
Surprisingly, Enzo Fernandez is now number two on 7.3. Too low, too high, or just right?
About right. About right. Roughly right.
Okay.
I'd probably have him a bit lower, but not significantly so. So I've got no real issue with that.
So you'd have Cole in the eighth somewhere. You'd
Yeah, but although
Enzo
I
at
wouldn't say
7.3.
Fernandez is Chelsea's second best player. I mean, I'd go Caicedo every single day of the week. Where's Caicedo?
Right after Enzo Fernandez, 7.17. So
Too
round
low.
up 7.2.
Too low.
Okay.
Too
So
low.
you'd have him
And can we
above.
just say on Caicedo, I think he's got to not get booked for about the next 5 games. 32. How many matches have played? 28. So
Yes.
4 games. If he gets a booking in the next 4 league games, he'll have a 2-match ban, which will be a disaster for Chelsea. So he is walking a
27.
tightrope. Played
27.
27. So he's got
Yeah.
5 games because I think it's up to and including the 32nd game. He's walking a tightrope. And my criticism of him, I think he's a wonderful player. I'd have him right up there with Cole in the eights. But he's picking up stupid bookings, stupid booking versus Villa,
Yeah.
stupid booking versus Southampton. And actually, earlier in the season, he picked up some bookings that could have been red cards. Just amazing player. I love him, but just tone it down a bit. And Chelsea really need him to somehow get through the next 5 games without a yellow card, because 2-game ban with the way that top 5 is just quite difficult to think about.
That'd be devastating for sure. Nico Jackson at a 7.1.
Perfect.
Okay. Uh, Trev Chalobah, who they're factoring in his time at Palace and
Okay.
Chelsea at roughly a 7.1.
I know he did well at Palace. I can't recall seeing him live at Palace. I feel a bit of a fraud, so I'm just going to say that's fine. Someone's seen him more than me at Palace. If it was just on Chelsea, I'd have him a bit lower than that, but I know he supposedly did very well at Palace. So yeah, that seems okay.
Madueke about 7.1.
Yeah. Yeah. He goes in and out of games, but when he's in games, he tends to do something that really impacts the game.
Robert Sanchez at a 7. The great, he's like the middle, so this is like the great middle.
Lower.
Okay. Tosin at a 7.
Yeah, I think Tosin. I don't think anybody was expecting Tosin to be Paolo Maldini. I think he's been solid. I think Tosin, for what he came in to do and for what he was meant to do, I think he's been quite good.
Jadon Sancho averaged 6.99, so raise that up to a 7.
That's really difficult because early in the season, the first 10 games, I was really encouraged by some of the Sancho stuff. But last few weeks, he's dropped really quite far off well, I can't think of the word, but he's dropped quite far. I'd probably have him a bit lower, but that might be a bit of recency bias from me in terms of judging him over the season.
Pedro Neto below him at a 6.94, so 6.9.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with it, but I'm also going to predict that come the end of the season, he's going to be pushing towards the 8s.
Oh,
he's going to continue. If he continues this fine form of 2 games, by the end of the season, he'll be pushing up towards the 8s.
Okay. Mark Cucurella dropped pretty significantly from our last time at a 6.94.
Yeah, I'd agree that he's not been great lately. Maybe a bit low because I think for a lot of the season, up until maybe the last sort of 6-7 games, he was pretty good. So I'd probably have him a bit higher than that, but he's definitely dropped off a bit.
Levi at a 6.9.
Yeah, that's about right. Levi's not having a great season in my book.
No. Nkunku just barely got past the 50% mark recently of Premier League.
He should have a Premier League rating and a Conference League rating.
Yeah.
Conference League, like 9.5.
Yeah.
Premier League, 4.5.
He's at a 6.8.
Yeah, that's probably
average.
about right. Yeah, probably about right.
And then the last one, 14 players in, Malo Gusto at a 6.8.
Yeah, about right. About right. It feels a bit harsh that he's bottom when you've got Robert Sanchez in the list, but yeah, probably about right. He's struggled at times.
Yeah. Let's just look ahead at the schedule here in our last little bit. So Chelsea have to win the next 3 games. Like it's a must. You have a game at Copenhagen on the 6th. You have a home game against Leicester on the 9th, and then you have a home game at Copenhagen in the reverse fixture on the 13th. Have to win those 3, right?
Well, they have to beat Leicester and win the Copenhagen tie. I mean, if they draw in Copenhagen and win 5-0 at home, it doesn't really matter. But yeah.
You have to have a decent showing in these games.
Yeah. Have to come out of them all positively.
And then after that, it gets interesting. Arsenal, who I think at this point it's pretty clear not going to win the title, have kind of fallen off. Form has been in and out all season. On the 16th away, that's historically kind of an interesting fixture for Chelsea. We got absolutely demolished there last season. International break, and then Spurs on the 2nd of April. Next
Spurs
5
is going to
games.
be tough. Spurs, I'm telling you, Spurs are going to have a really good finish to the season. They are fresh.
Really?
All their players are coming back. They are fresh. They should have drawn, if not beaten, Man City in the second half last night. Spurs are going to be tough opponents for everyone they face now. I think Spurs is a horrible fixture for anyone. They're playing with zero pressure in the league because they're not going for anything, can just enjoy themselves. I think Spurs, for any team, not just Chelsea, is a horrible fixture in the remaining list. I really think they're going to have a very good run.
They're on 33 points in 13th place.
Yeah, and they probably can't really do anything in the league, but it's just too much to make up. But I think that would be a really tough game. Arsenal away is interesting. I mean, if Arsenal away was this weekend, I'd fancy Chelsea to maybe you'd certainly go there saying this is a chance. I don't quite know where Arsenal will be injury. I mean, obviously there'll be no Havertz and Jesus because they're long term. I don't know whether Saka could be back by the time Chelsea play them, which would be a huge thing, and it would lift the whole crowd and everything. So that might be a bit injury dependent on how I feel about that game when it gets closer to it.
I mean, after that, you're looking at Brentford away, Ipswich home, Fulham away, Everton home. Like there's some decent, fixtures in April. Chelsea right now are projected to finish in fifth spot. They are currently in fifth because City and Forest won, but the gap between fifth and third is 2 points now, and so I mean there really is something there to still be won. It looks like Chelsea
Hey,
opt out.
I said after the last Brighton defeat, I still think Chelsea will get in the Champions League with it being a top five. I stand
Yeah.
by that. What I would say is the way the league is every single week there's going to be a lot of movement. I mean, I always mention Villa on this podcast. Villa lost to Crystal Palace. Had they have won against Crystal Palace, we would be fifth. We lost and we're 10th. There's a 5-place difference on one result.
Yeah.
And every week there's going to be a few surprises because a lot of those teams are playing each other. And it's going to look very different every week. But I think when it averages out that Chelsea will be there. They might drop out the top five a couple of times around tough fixtures. What they can't, I do think we're now at a stage where they can't chuck in a couple of stupid ones. That will be really damaging. So, they can't draw at home to Ipswich or something and then, lose. Brentford, although Brentford's home form weirdly isn't very good lately. It's always traditionally been very good, but yeah, a couple of stupid results would really damage any team at this stage, and that's what they can't do. On the flip side, if they somehow manage to win 3 games on the trot somewhere, again, any of those clubs, they're going to be
Yep.
in an incredible position to then take it. But I really do think Chelsea will finish in the top 5 and have done consistently for a long, long time.
Do you think that Ty and Josh will get time against Copenhagen, assuming that the fixtures feel semi assured at any point?
I'd imagine so. I'd imagine that's got to be something that's been looked at. Yeah, I'd be quite surprised if it didn't. It's whether you whether you try and win it in the first leg with a very strong team ahead of the Leicester game, where so maybe the first leg they don't start or not both of them start, with the idea of wrapping up that first leg, deciding that the Leicester game you should be able to get through without having to chop and change too much pretty easily, and then maybe the Copenhagen home tie gives an opportunity for a few of those players to start, see off the tie, and then also have fresh players coming in for that trip to Arsenal before the international break. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
total guess, but it seems a legitimate guess.
And it's going to be important because the injury list, despite West Fofana being on the bench against Southampton, you imagine that's going to be a very, very slow
Mm.
reintroduction, right? He was only playing one match a week when he was healthy
Yeah,
earlier in the season, and you can't imagine that he's going to come back and play 4 matches in a row, sort of vibe. Uh, Still tentative on Nico, still tentative on Noni, still tentative on Romeo, still tentative on Benoit Badiashile, who no one's
yeah,
seen or heard from. Trev Chalaba, obviously, looks like he'll be back a
yeah,
little bit
yeah,
sooner. I think that was more of a bad luck kind of fall
yeah,
issue.
yeah.
Um, it's still not certain that these guys are going to be back in time for this kind of late season push? And I guess the question is, do you think that Chelsea has enough to get through the international break and then potentially get through parts of April without the full complement?
Well, look, I think Nico will. I'd expect Nico to come back fairly swiftly after the international break. From what I know, I mean, obviously there's room for people to have setbacks, but from what I know, Nico should come back fairly soon after the international break. And that also spares him having to go off with Senegal and long journey and all that. So you'd imagine he'll come back nice and fresh. Lavia as well is meant to come back fairly soon after the international break, but I'm just so wary to pin anything on dates with Lavia because it seems like folly because of the problems he has with injuries. So I wouldn't want to get people's hopes up on that one necessarily. Although, like I say, the timeline given seems to be very soon after the international break. The others I'm not so sure about, but I just think Guy seems to be worse than Nico. Guy seems to be maybe further on. I think Nico coming back would give them a real big boost. And Nico coming back, actually, if he could come back in time for that Tottenham game, the way Tottenham play with their high line, Nico's got a good record against Tottenham and seems to like playing against that high line. So Nico could do some damage there. So you'd like to get him back for that one. On Wes, I wonder whether they're going to just try and ease him into a position where he might be able to start against Arsenal. Wonder if they're just going to try and get him some minutes over the next 3 games into a position potentially to start against Arsenal, because that would be massive. Because then you've got an international break. There's no way in a million years they'll let him go on international duty.
No.
So you've then got an international break. So if you could get like 20 minutes and a couple of 30 minutes or something like that into the tank, even just if he comes into consideration for the Arsenal game, because if you could start that Arsenal game and come through, I don't know, 60, 70 minutes without injury, and then have the international break, that would put him in a really good place for after the international break. But I'm not a doctor, but again, that would be my guess at maybe why we saw him on the bench. Maybe that's where they're heading with him.
I think I want to close this one out. Obviously it's going to be a big couple of weeks, and we will on our next episode talk about like the financial situation, do more of a breakdown of that stuff. But part of that, the reason why we want to do that is because we did a little bit of the sporting director analysis last time. We've talked about the injuries at nauseum at this point. There was a protest on Tuesday against Southampton. There were, reports of between 100 and 200 people outside of the Bovril Gate. They did a small march down the Fulham Road a little bit. It was covered by serious journalists. I think there were some interesting parts of the protest. There's some parts that I didn't find that great, to be candid. What is your thought on what kind of comes next here? Because obviously a win helps to kind of, make paper over a small bit of the cracks, but it seems as if this vocal group is growing. What are your thoughts about this and what comes next after?
So the only way, I think there seems to be 2 groups within this sort of protest, as it were, for me. And there's one group I have a lot of sympathy for, and that's the group within it who seem to be the group who are unhappy and want to protest because of ticket prices, because of the sort of match day experience at Chelsea, because of the way they feel the club is run around the football as much as anything, and the culture of the club that they've supported for so long. I feel like there's a group who seem to be protesting very much and seem very unhappy, around issues within the club, within the culture of the club, within the way they perceive fans are being treated and the atmosphere and the way in which the club went ahead. And I have sympathy in that. And, I haven't grown up supporting Chelsea, so I wouldn't want to wish to tell that group of supporters what they should and shouldn't do. And I think I've said on this show before, that element seems to be an element at a lot of Premier League clubs at the moment. It seems to be a thing about Premier League and modern football as much as it is about individual clubs. And I get it. You see a lot of people protest. So people who are protesting for that, I think, I get it. I think fair enough. And I think to some degree they will continue no matter what. They might not be marching up and down the Fulham Road and they might not have banners out, but they will remain in some sort of status quo until they get a much better feel about the club and ticket prices and things. And it's not result dependent. It's not, if Chelsea win, they'll still feel the same. If Chelsea lose, they'll still feel the same. There's the other element within it who I feel are far more results focused. And that's shown by the fact that, a couple of months ago they were singing, "We've got our Chelsea back." And 2 months later we're singing, "We want our Chelsea back." And that seems far more results driven and upset about on the pitch performance. To those people, my message would just be grow up, quite frankly. Welcome to the real world, guys. Football clubs don't win every game. Football teams don't win every game. Be upset, be frustrated, question the manager, question the sporting directors, listen to excellent podcasts like yours and other excellent podcasts, read pieces, have your say. But if you're protesting, if you're literally marching up and down the road, calling people all kinds of names, shouting all sorts of obscenities about a run of results that's really only lasted 3 years, which I know is a long time, but also isn't a long time. Come on, grow up. Football is cyclical, and lots of clubs have their day and lots of clubs don't have their day. Chelsea have gone through a horrendously difficult period when the club was forced into sale and put under sanctions. And it's been really difficult for a lot of people. But if your only real complaint about it is, "Oh, well, we're sixth and we should be second or third," grow up for me. That's not to say you shouldn't be upset or frustrated or angry about it. That's football emotions. But protesting about it, really? If you're protesting about the other stuff, my opinion, no problem at all. I get it, and that seems legitimate. But if you're just going to protest every time Chelsea drop out the top 5 or top 6, or if they are hammered away at Arsenal, and then they beat Tottenham, and all of a sudden it's kind of singing about everything's great, I can't really take that seriously. And I feel like there are two groups within the protest. I might have got this wrong. Someone might be able to come on and tell me why I've got this horribly wrong. But viewing it from the outside, there seem those two distinct groups within the unhappy mass, as it were. And that's just my opinion. And I would presume that the ones who are very result driven and are unhappy if they see the table will keep going up and down with the form. The other ones I don't feel is reflected by results and the form, and therefore it will continue. Obviously, like anything, if you've got one group of unhappy fans or two groups of potentially unhappy fans, if the results do go badly, or if Chelsea end in a position that everybody's a little bit unhappy with, then it will gain momentum. It will obviously gain momentum. But, at the end of the day, I know there's a lot to complain about, and I know there's legitimate questions for the manager, for sporting directors, for owners. But at the end of the day, are Chelsea performing better than last season? Yes. Might be marginal, but yes. So is that progress at the moment? Yes. Let's see where that finishes at the end of the season. At the end of the season, we might be saying there's not been any progress. Or at the end of the season, we might be saying, well, there's tangible progress there. And while it's slower than we might want, or it's slower than we feel £1 billion should make it, it's hard to protest if there's progress, if you're protesting about results.
Well, we're a few hours away from Todd Bowley doing a bit of a conference. We'll see what the quotes kind of come out with before our next recording, Matt. But appreciate your thoughts, your insights, and we will be back with a lot more as we head into March and April. And again, more to come on our live show at Classic Football Shirts on April 1st. So that is going to wrap this one up. Appreciate everyone. Thank you, Matt, for your insight, and we will be back with a new episode very, very soon. Until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.